My name is Cody. I'm the Director of Community at Paragon One, and I'm here to get us started for today's Bridges event. For those of you who might also be new to our Bridges events, just want to share with you that Paragon One, our team who is hosting this event, creates 6 to 8 week long remote externships with leading name brand companies all over the world to help you learn new skills, earn experiences, and be more competitive in the job and internship market. In addition to those programs that we run year round, we host these Bridges career advice events to bring even more value to your career and really your whole life. So as we see more students join us here in the room and get settled, just want to give you a couple quick tips. Make sure you're situated in some place with good lighting and little to no noise. Turn on your camera and take notes. You can go ahead and mute yourself for the time being, but know that there will be a student Q&A. So please share your questions and share your affirmations in the chat because we want to hear from you later on in today's event. So yes or yes, can we do that? Can we see some emoji reactions here on the screen for today's event and our awesome moderator and panelists? Thank you so much. I see some hearts, some celebration, thumbs up. Thank you. Appreciate you all being here. I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's session, Ruth Tang. Ruth is a partner at KPMG, which is one of the largest firms providing accounting, consulting, tax, and legal, financial advisory, assurance services in nearly 160 countries across the globe. Ruth started her tenure at KPMG after graduating from NYU Stern School of Business. Since starting at the firm, she's developed an extensive experience in accounting and financial and ESG reporting for public and private entities. Over the course of her 20-year career at KPMG, she's become well known for her deep accounting knowledge in the asset management industry. Ruth, we are so excited to have you and all of your infinite wisdom with us here today. Thank you for joining us.
Cody, thank you for that. My goodness, every time somebody introduces me, I just figure out like, wow, that's how many years I've put into this profession and how much hard work that I've seen sort of come to life. So it's a pleasure to be back with you again and with your students. Absolutely a pleasure. And it's really nice to be hanging out with two more additional amazing professionals today. We are joined with Julia Matthews from Peloton and also Amelia DeLuca from Delta. I'm going to give these wonderful panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. So Julia, why don't you go first?
Absolutely. Thank you for that warm welcome, Cody and Ruth. It's so wonderful to be here with you all today. My name is Julia Matthews, and I lead the ESG team at Peloton. So the team that focuses on environmental sustainability, and then that engages with our philanthropic partners to donate funds. And then also the team that just oversees across the board, how are we showing up on ESG issues? Do we have the right systems in place, the right governance structures in place to make sure that we're doing ESG work the way we want to? To tell you a little bit about my background, I graduated from UPenn and went on to join Teach for America. I really wanted to make an impact, and that felt like the most compelling way to do that upon graduation. And that started a long career focus on social impact in particular. I spent some time in a variety of education organizations, had the great opportunity to attend business school at the Tuck School of Business, and after that went into management consulting at Booz & Company. Then I came back to the education sector, worked in some other education organizations as well, both doing direct program leadership and then also in education consulting with a variety of different types of nonprofits, school districts, foundations, etc. I ended up working for the Newark Department of Education, leading the budget there, and then heading out on my own as a consultant. I started my own consulting practice, and that's what led me to Peloton. Peloton became one of my clients, and then kind of was at the right place at the right time, talking to the right people, and things fell into place. And I ended up with this incredible role leading this team. And so now I'm really in my dream job. And I'm really excited to tell you a little bit more about ESG and the work that we get to do.
And Amelia?
Yeah, I'm happy. So great to be here today. Similar to what Julia said, I have just like I'm in a dream right now. So I'm in the airline industry at Delta Airlines. So I love the airline industry. I love travel. I love Delta. It's the only company I've ever worked for. And I really love the sustainability and ESG space. I'm the vice president of sustainability. So I lead our environmental efforts, which are pretty heavy, because as you can imagine, as an airline, because we're so dependent on fossil fuel products, there is quite a journey in terms of how we're going to become more sustainable. So very focused on our environmental footprint, as well as more broadly ESG. So how we kind of connect the dots across our organization into our social efforts, as well as just how we're structured and our governance and our leadership. I started my career right out of college. At the time, it was Northwest Airlines. If you don't know much about the airline industry, kind of in the last 15 years, all the airlines have essentially come together. So Northwest Airlines was a bankrupt airline at the time, but I chose to work there because I really wanted to travel the world, and it's the best thing I've ever done. So I have traveled the world for personal pleasure, for tons of work trips. I've lived overseas twice. I've lived in 6 different locations in this job, and I've just gotten to do so many different cool jobs at the airline, from super analytical jobs to I led our VIP call centers through the pandemic, which was profoundly impactful on me in terms of not only how do you manage an operation through the pandemic, but really how do you protect the livelihoods of 300 individuals in an industry that was one of the most hit industries during the pandemic. And then about 15 months ago, I had the opportunity to move into sustainability, which we'll talk more about. But it's absolutely been the best 15 months of my career. But I'm certain, and kind of I bet Ruth feels the same way actually, but we've got a lot more journey ahead of us in these companies and these industries that we love so much.
Well, Amelia, since you mentioned it, perhaps I should say that I did spend about just over 20 years with KPMG, first starting as an auditor, right? I mean, everybody comes in thinking, oh, do you really want to be an auditor, Ruth? You don't look like you're that quintessential auditor. You don't have that personality. I said, well, this is a starting place. And this is where I'm going to find what my higher purpose is, right? What I'm meant to do professionally. And it's been 20 years, and I gotta say, you sort of kind of go into different cracks and different projects and trying to look for what you're meant to do. And lo and behold, a couple of years ago, ESG just started to become a thing. And from a consulting perspective, we are the front lines. We are there kind of getting all the questions. And I specialize in reporting and measurement, and ESG is, at the end of the day, all about reporting and measurement. And really, in my dream job right now. And I can't tell you, Julia, Amelia, everybody that I speak with that is at the head of sustainability of organizations also say, Ruth, I have waited years, sometimes decades, to do this. And thank you for kind of giving us a sneak peek into your journey. But I gotta say, all of us look really young, right? But when we first started in our career, Julia said this was a passion of yours, but you couldn't figure out a way to sort of bring that out, maybe perhaps in your education, not-for-profit foundation work. And Amelia, you love traveling, and so do I, by the way. And I kind of wish I took your path, which is traveling across the world on business. But when we started, nobody was talking about ESG. I'm not even sure ESG was like a popular acronym. Everybody was saying sustainability, corporate social responsibility, community impact, everything but ESG, right? Now, what do you notice, maybe just even 5-10 years ago compared to where we are today? What do you notice that's different in what we love to do today? Julia?
I'm happy to jump in. Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And when I started, as I mentioned, I wanted to do work that really had an impact. And I thought about all the ways that I can have an impact and landed on Teach for America. And even, when I was going into consulting, I wanted to focus on work that had an impact, and coming back into education. That was really my driver, because I figure if you're going to be working so hard, you want to do something that you really care about and it's going to make a difference in the world. And so much of the time where that question landed, the answer landed for me was that I needed to work in the nonprofit sector to really be focused on driving forward an impact and to work with people who were oriented similarly. And that was great. And that's where I grew up, and I learned a tremendous amount, and do feel like the work we did had a lot of impact. And what I find particularly amazing is that the way the landscape is evolving, I don't feel like I have to just be boxed in to one area anymore, where businesses are now understanding it's our responsibility to serve our broader community and to be good stewards of our planet, and to make really responsible decisions that consider a broad set of stakeholders, not just our shareholders. And, almost 200 CEOs came together a few years ago and made this commitment and said, we need to be focused on our broader place in society. And that's how we need to orient ourselves. And so now when Ruth and Amelia and I go out and do our work, we get to think about that broader stakeholder base. And it's perfectly reasonable to center how is what we're doing best for our society. And to do that with the resources of a corporation, and to be the magnitude of the results that we can see is just on a different scale. And then to be meeting consumers who, love our brands and have them in their homes and participate within the community on a daily basis, and have them saying, this is what we care about. We want to make sure we're showing up in a way we can feel proud of and affiliating ourselves with companies we can feel proud of. It's this circle now. So then our customers ask for this, we deliver it, they continue to ask for it. And so it's not just the company going out and doing this work, it's in relationship with the consumer too. And so this is a channel for the consumer to use their spending power to influence responsible decision making. So it's just a completely different ball game, and it's so much better, I think, because the magnitude of the change that we can affect is just so much more dramatic.
Yeah, and I think I'll just kind of go off of what Julia said there. And our paths are a little bit different, because I would say this kind of opportunity to step into an impact role was really brought to me. I would not say I felt like I had a chance to do it before, or that it was something that was like my top priority. I mean, just being really honest, my priority in my career has always been kind of like global cultures, just living overseas. Delta has a bunch of airline partners. So like I have sat and worked in offices with just so many different cultures. And so that to me was my passion, right? It was just meeting people from around the world, figuring out how we work together, how do we partner together, how do we make our businesses stronger? But ultimately, the amazing responsibility of an airline is, connecting people to places, but people to people and people to opportunities. And how do we do that on a global scale through our partners was really my passion. But where it started to change a little bit for me was in 2020. And many people, everyone here was profoundly impacted in 2020, right? That concept of like, what am I doing with my life? And if you were in the middle of your career, kind of like I was in corporate America with kids at home, you're really sitting there being like, what am I doing? Like, why? Like, why am I even coming to work right now? Because some days it just felt so hard to do it when you have the kids at home. And again, I'm running these call centers, and just, it was so emotionally draining. And at the same time, I was also leading and had stood up and was leading Delta's global sales DE&I initiative at the time when George Floyd was murdered. And it was through my kind of deep kind of education of myself through that journey to try to figure out like, okay, so what do we do now, right? Like, how do you make a difference in the aftermath of this? And to Julia's point, one of the things that came, out of, there's a lot that came out of it, right? But that the private sector has got to be on the front of this. So the private sector, just through the funds that they have, through the fact that they're trusted brands, that if they take a stance on something, that the world will follow in suit. And so I was incredibly moved by watching what happened through the private sector. And yet there's some, mixed feelings on how the private sector is approaching social issues today. Do we do enough? Do we overstep, right? Those debates are always going to be there. But for me, it became so apparent that these trusted brands that we have created, Peloton, Delta, that those brands also not only have a responsibility, but an opportunity to take social issues and put them to the forefront. And so when I had the opportunity to lead the sustainability team, it was not only that responsibility as, kind of a keeper of the trusted brand of Delta to make sure that society continues to fly, despite the fact that a lot of people say you shouldn't fly for the environment. But it's really kind of core to our bottom line at this point. And Julia probably does the same thing that I do. Every quarter I'm on the phone with investors who are basically, it used to be questions about, the returns that companies were making and the dividends they were paying out or whatever. And now it's just consistently on the environmental and the social side. What's your DE&I scores? What's your plan to decarbonize? Just over and over and over again. And I think that just highlights again the importance of the work that we do, not only for the, the people on the planet, but really for our bottom lines.
Amelia and Julia, this is amazing. And I want to say that it must have been 2 or 3 years ago. I do a lot of recruiting also in universities. And what I've realized is that these students that are coming out of the business schools and their trade schools understand that the purpose of a business is no longer just to maximize shareholder return, but it is to maximize shareholder return in a responsible manner. That tail end of that definition was never part of our business school training. And so these are the folks that are coming out of school. They're going to be your employees, your customers, your investors eventually. And that complete change in mindset is what's driving a lot of this. Look, a couple of years ago, I'm out there, I'm speaking with clients and big companies as well, and it wasn't top of mind. Today, there isn't a single conversation in the boardroom or a single conversation at the C-suite that hadn't at least begun to integrate and weave in, okay, well, how does that kind of line up with our sustainability goals? How does that line up with our ESG goals? And is it all integrated from a risk management perspective? So in case you're a student here today and you're thinking, well, I kind of quickly glanced at the chat. I studied economics, I studied this, I studied that, and I didn't quite get into sustainability. It's interesting. When you get into that next job and that career, you're going to realize that the sustainability part of the business is weaved in to your role and responsibility in the business. So really critical to think about. So one more question just on with Amelia and Julia here, just to reflect on your personal journey again and how far you have all come. What challenges do you remember experiencing, and how have you turned that into a valuable experience and learning for yourself? And then maybe leveraging that to open new doors of opportunity for yourself. Amelia, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. I'll reflect on maybe 2 different challenges as I've gone. So early on in my career, often getting kind of pigeonholed at times. And so I came in, I was a manager. My first job was highly analytical. I did a lot, right? That is something that you can get pigeonholed in. And I remember the first time I had that stretch job, right? Where I've just been very blessed. I've always had a bunch of admins helped me and kind of brought me along places. And I remember when I got that first stretch job, there was so much chatter about how I was for that job and how, because I only had this background and no one had ever seen me do this other type of work, that I was not going to be able to do it. And some of it may have had gender and age, kind of nuances to it. Who knows at this point, but it was there. And so that was early on in my career. And I remember at the time recognizing in myself that I will not fail at this. I've never failed at any fail at this, and I'm smart and I'm going to learn it. And the first time you go through that cycle, and each one of you will go through that cycle in your careers where you're taking a stretch job and there are going to be doubters out there. The first time you do it, that you not only do you rise to the occasion, but you exceed expectations. It's fascinating. It's going to fuel your fire. So that's the first thing I learned early on. And now I actively seek out those jobs that are a stretch for me, that have a risk for me. And I find that I actually do best when I'm stretching myself versus taking my comfortable jobs. So that's the first challenge that actually turned into a positive. And then I think the second challenge as you go through your career is, again, kind of that true to self. So early on, you're doing jobs, right? You're doing kind of tasks and concepts and things like that. And it's all about learning. And it's all about being excellent. It's all about kind of just expanding your network and growing your skill set. And then there's a point in your career. And again, was it in 2020 for me because of COVID? Who knows? Where you're but again, what am I doing with my life? And who do I want to work for? And what is the impact I really want to make on the world? And then it becomes a challenge to make sure that everyone around you understands that I'm a little bit different. And so, when I chose to take the sustainability role, I'll be honest with you, most of the people within Delta, because I had been very much slated for this one pathway upwards, they were what are you doing? This feels very flaky. Why are you going to sustainability? You don't have a background there. You've never expressed interest in it. This is your path upwards. Why are you doing that? And I was but I have to follow my passions. I have to follow my passions. This is my passion. This is where I want to be. I don't care if it holds me back from more senior level titles. This is what I want to do. And you're going to find not only are you fulfilled, completely fulfilled, but you're actually the best version of yourself when you take, again, that risk and follow your heart. And so whether that's following leaders that you want to work for or following passions, I just encourage that concept of risk, again, flip that challenge into this really good feeling of I am taking a risk, and no matter what, there will be a reward after this. Julia, what do you think?
Oh, I love that. I'm inspired by your answers. I'm sitting here reflecting. Yeah, I mean, I would add something in a very similar vein. I think that my biggest challenge over time has been myself, my own doubts, my own worries, you know. You can look at my resume and background and think, oh my gosh, I've gone to these elite schools. I've had these elite, experiences. I should feel like on top of the world and everything's perfect. And yeah, I mean, it is wonderful. And at every step of the way, I doubted myself. At every step of the way, I thought, do I deserve this? Is this a fluke? They don't know. They let me in and I tricked them. They put me in charge and I tricked them and I don't know what I'm doing. But it's like you get to a certain point and you realize that everybody feels like that. It's not just you, everybody, especially the people who are good, especially the people who are humble and who are always learning and pushing themselves, see the opportunity where they have been imperfect, and so we lean into that piece instead of leaning into the piece where, well, things did go particularly well, or someone put me here for a reason, or, I went for this and was successful for a reason. One thing in particular that stands out to me is I used to have this boss who was just like a superstar. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone really respected him. And I was kind of his right-hand person. And so I was working really closely with him and I was intimidated by him. I was like, oh my gosh, he's so smart. Everyone, he thinks he's so great. And so I was always trying to like be mini him, like what would he do? And let me try to do that. And let me, because if I don't do that, it's wrong. I need to do it his way. So it's right. And I realized after too long, I should have realized it sooner. That's like a messed up way to operate, right? Because if I'm always trying to do what he would do, I'm not honing my own intuition. I'm not honing my own sense of true north. And let me take in all of the variables and use them to make a decision of what I know is right. I'm trying to figure out what he would think is right. And so signals get crossed when you do that. And you actually come up with a worse answer than if you follow your own intuition. And so that's actually something I'm really working on with my own team now, that like, it's not about, for them to figure out what I would do and they do that. I'm trying to make explicit to them what are the pieces of information that I consider when I'm making a decision, who are the stakeholders I'm thinking of, and what is each stakeholder's perspective, and how do I account for that in arriving at the decision that I would arrive at, and then inviting them to think about what decision they would arrive at. So I feel like one of the biggest challenges I've worked through and I'm kind of getting better at is just trusting that I'm just as good as anybody else. I'm just as smart. I'm just as capable. And I need to trust myself, and listen to my own voice, not try to be someone else, because that's not going to be effective. Listen to myself. I'm here for a reason. I'm fine. Just like you're fine, and like pursue your own development and intuition, because you believe in it, not from a place of fear and worry.
I love that. That's like, oh my goodness, your stories are about personal grit, tenacity, drive, but also trying to build the culture that you want to see, that you want to thrive in. I being with KPMG for 20 years, I have, and by the way, KPMG, one of the big four firms, arguably one of the most traditional, right, tight companies out there, high integrity, doing things by the book, really for like very rigid, right? And I thought to myself, well, I love the firm, but there must be another way of doing it. And so these past 2 decades at the firm, I've been working on sort of changing the culture, making it a little bit like lighter, welcoming this next generation that can always operate in this tight, frame. And really that, interestingly enough, has been welcomed with wide open arms, because just because a company has been operating in a certain way doesn't mean that's the way that they want to continue to operate. They're looking for change agents. They're looking for people that are willing to throw up their arms and say, hey, it's been wonderful how you've been surviving for the last, or thriving for the last 120 years, but here's how we can really bring it to that next level. So that organization that you join, really look into the culture and look into, if there are things that you can do as an employee and as a people to change that culture as well. I love that. So a lot of good content here. One thing that I want to get to is, a lot of young people are here with us today, really looking and exploring what their next steps might be. What are we looking for in candidates today at your companies, Julia and Amelia? What are you looking for? What are the qualities that you're looking for? We see resumes all day long, but it's that interview that really kind of solidifies, and we know in our heart to hearts that this employee will do well in our organization. What are those qualities? Julia, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. I care tremendously about someone's intellectual curiosity. So are they showing up with a learning posture? Are they like bright-eyed? Do you feel connected with them when you're talking to them? Would you want to spend time with them? Because so much of our work, it's so personal, it's so intimate, and you want to come together and you want to be on the same team. You want to think creatively together. Like, you want to be in an environment where you're happy and you're generative and you're comfortable taking risks and you're comfortable moving forward together. And so I look for someone who kind of shows up with that energy, I would say. I also look for someone who is flexible. So things evolve so much in today's environment. Things are constantly shifting. And it can be stressful sometimes for, now we're focused on this and now we're going to evolve a bit and focus here. And so it's important to me that my team be in a position to continuously focus on, well, what are we trying to do here? And as conditions evolve, how can we incorporate those changing conditions into our path so that it's okay? We don't freak out when plans evolve. And then I would say, lastly, so much of what we do is focused on relationships with other team members, and we need to bring others on board. We need to do so much of our work, particularly in ESG, which is a really cross-functional area. So I can't just do ESG at Peloton, the end. I have to work very closely with members of our supply chain team, our product team, our people team, our DEI team, our real estate team, legal, comms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I work with all of these people, investor relations, government affairs. I work with all these people every single week. And so I need to bring on team members who are good at shifting their focus to look at things from the investor point of view, the people point of view, the comms point of view, all, hour to hour, and to find a common language with people who are thinking about these different areas, because we need to bring a lot of people along on this journey.
Julia took all my answers. No, I will, I'm going to add one more. I will say sustainability and ESG right now, and I see it in some of the questions, and we can kind of come back to it. We're at a really interesting time where often it is centralized. And so sometimes the way we hire is we are hiring for like a very specific skill. Like, I'm hiring someone for hydrogen, right? Like this very, very siloed. I think that's a very kind of short blip. And then I think it's going to become about a little bit what Ruth mentioned, which is basically you cannot just be a hydrogen expert. You need to be able to connect that to the business in some way, shape, or form. And so I'm personally kind of excited about what's to come, and all of you that are going to be educated in this, even if it's whether it's a degree or like you just have had a class, right? One, you're well ahead of me at that point. So that's phenomenal. I get so excited when I like hire new people that know so much more than I do. It's my favorite thing in general, but especially in this space, because it allows us to accelerate. So I think part of it, my point of that is just a little bit of, patience in terms of like, it may seem like we don't exactly know at times what we're hiring for in corporate America when it comes to sustainability and ESG, but I think we're still building our teams and trying to figure it out. So the characteristics we're going to look for, though, and this is consistent beyond just sustainability and ESG, it's the two things that Julia said, and I will call out one more, which is it used to be that you had to interview perfectly, right? And we knew the schools that interviewed or how they taught you how to interview, and people would show up and they'd be robots and how they answered. And it would just actually unnerve me where I'd be like, but what is your personality? And so I got to the point where my last question was always, if Halloween was tomorrow, what costume would you show up in? And it would just throw everyone off. And like, but I would literally hire based upon their ability to react to that question with something that was funny, but also personal. And so my point being, show up and be yourself. And I'll even just share the reason I chose the company that I chose, Northwest Airlines, when it was bankrupt, was because of the fact that I got asked, what's the book you're reading right now? And just to be completely honest, it was like, I was a senior in college. I just come back from spring break. It was like a trashy beach novel, right? Like it was nothing great. So I sat there and I'm like, do I tell them some really, reputable novel, or do I say what I actually am reading? And I told them what I was actually reading. And the woman I was interviewing with goes, yeah, I just read that book. And I knew at that moment that that was the company for me, right? And that's how I chose my career, was in that question. And by being honest myself and that person being honest, I knew that was the fit. So show up and be honest, because if you try to have this facade, you're going to pick the wrong, they're going to pick you for the wrong reasons, and you're going to pick the wrong company.
I just couldn't agree more. I think that's so important. That's how I ask my questions too. They give us some script and I'm like, I never follow it because I just want to get to know the person. I want to be like, is this a reasonable person? Are they going to have good judgment? Are they going to be easygoing? Do they focus on important things and what they're talking about? Are they authentic? Because if someone comes in, as you said, as a robot, guess what? When they go out and they try to talk to some other team that we need to work on something with, the other team's going to think they're a robot and they're not going to want to work with them, And I pride myself on the fact that my team is beloved across Peloton. One of my team members is actually on here, so you can see if you can find her. But they're beloved. And the reason they're beloved is because they show up in an authentic way and they're serious and they do great work, of course, table stakes, and they're natural. And because they're natural, you can trust them. And because you can trust them, you can work well with them. And that honestly is the secret to our team's success.
I think that might be a common theme among all ESG teams, is that we're probably the most joyful team. And you know what? We have to work with so many different internal stakeholders. It's an unbelievable amount of people that we have to touch in our everyday. Yet we just do it and we go with it, and the chemistry is there. And I think it has a lot to do with our overall appreciation for ESG and this sort of higher purpose, right? And we don't sort of sweat some of the small stuff and some of the, bureaucracy that has to go on within an organization, but we kind of focus on the goal, we focus on that higher purpose, and we just sort of go at it. I love that. We just have a couple of minutes left here before I just get this flag from Cody to say, well, we need to start answering some of these questions that's in chat. So let's think a little bit about the future. Julia, we'll start with you. You started in education, you built a consulting practice, amazing, on your own, and then you went back to education and foundations. What, if anything, are you particularly excited about as you kind of look into the future? What do you think you might lean towards?
With my own career or like at ESG at Peloton?
It could be either, but yeah, maybe your own career. I know it's really hard because we're all in this special place, in our job.
I'll maybe answer in two parts if that's okay. One of the things I'm really excited. I mean, we're building from scratch at Peloton, so the world is our oyster, and what a joy to be able to design something thoughtfully from the ground up. I pinch myself every day. And so we're pushing really hard to figure out, what's our ambition around sustainability and what kinds of targets do we want to set, and then work towards them, and building a lot of the building blocks on sustainability. And I can get into that more if that's of interest. And so that's something I'm really proud of. One of the things I'm really excited about on the social impact side is how we're doing our work. So we are really trying to be very deliberate about not just what we're doing, but how we do it. And I have this benefit of coming from the social sector and seeing it from the other side. And so I get to really apply that knowledge in my day-to-day work. We've committed to becoming an anti-racist organization. And I fundamentally believe that part of that is how we show up. It's not just the end result, but it's how we step through. And so some of the ways that we're doing it today is we've gotten really clear on, well, what are we after? What's the change that we want to see in the world at Peloton? What area are we trying to impact? And so we are particularly focused on increasing access to and engagement with physical fitness and mental health. So that's our sandbox. That's what we want to influence. And then we have partners in each of the markets in which we operate. And we've said, well, where is the greatest health inequity? Looking at data in each market. So which population do we want to serve based on the greatest inequity? Naming that population, then doing empirical research to understand what are the greatest barriers to physical fitness and mental health in those specific markets with those specific people, and then say, okay, well, now that we know what the barriers are, let's find organizations that are really thoughtfully addressing those barriers. So not coming in with a like, I don't know, let me just guess based on my experience, what would be good. Let me really take the time to learn, what's happening on the ground and how can we make sure we're tailoring our work to be responsive, and learning from people who have the lived experience and co-creating with our partners to develop initiatives that are really responsive to the conditions that they're looking to navigate. So I feel particularly proud of that work ahead. I think it's different than the norm. It's not how every corporation is showing up. A lot of times there's a, supporting a gala or whatever, which is cool and important. But I do believe that this is taking it to the next level in a way I feel really proud of. And so I'm really excited about that work ahead for that team. And then in my own personal life, my experience has really been pretty US centric. And so I'm really excited for, taking a page out of Amelia and Ruth's book and leaning into travel and leaning into just really learning about how other cultures are navigating similar questions. I think and hope that that'll be a part of the next stage of my career, and I'm excited for it.
Love it. Amelia, same question. What are you looking forward to in the future?
Great. Well, Julia, I just got to put a plug in. When you do start those travels, just make sure that you know that Delta Airlines always got your back.
Only Delta. So loyal.
All right, great. That was not even planted, everyone. So this is a good answer.
But it's true.
Thank you. Similarly, I'll go with something I'm excited about from the business side and then a personal side. So from the business side, there's so much that I could tell you about what the airline industry is trying to do right now. So we are categorized as what's called a hard to decarbonize sector. There's like 5 that are basically going to just take us a real long time to figure it out. So it's the airline industry, it's shipping, it's steel, cement. It's just not easy for us. There is no easy solution here because those airplanes fly with fuel. You cannot put a bunch of batteries on them or they will not take off. So we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And so it's like this huge journey, right? And so there's 2 things we're doing right now that I just want to comment on that I think are very cool. So one is we're trying to make sure that while it's going to take us a while for what's coming on the tailpipe, that our onboard experience is as sustainable as possible. And there's so much beautiful storytelling because you got this captive audience that's on the plane for a long period of time. And so not only do you want to get rid of the single-use plastic, but what's the story behind it? So our new amenity kits, for example, we removed all single-use plastic, but they're all handmade by a Mexican artisan, a female Mexican artisan, who is now making a living wage because of that. And it's got the name and a barcode and you can look it up. So much like the products you're purchasing, we're kind of overhauling our onboard product and trying to really look at those kind of diverse communities or just communities globally that could really benefit from having their products on board for Delta, just because we have that captive audience. So that's the first. And then I think the second one is we're really trying to connect our message to the criticality just in general of social sustainability, right? And by that, I mean, you could fairly quickly in the next 15 years, bring down the emissions from aviation, but you'd have to charge a boatload of money because that fuel that is available today that's more sustainable is incredibly expensive. So if we take a product, which is air travel, which is already not available to large communities and cut it off further, even in the US, there's communities that don't have access to air travel. And that's not to mention around the globe, how many communities. So we're really trying to take a different look, which is if we're going to not only decarbonize our society, but really lift communities out of poverty or really, and have new communities have access to new opportunities, air travel needs to not only continue to be or try to be as, affordable as it is today, but it needs to be more affordable. And so we're really connecting the environmental and the social part from just in general access to communities and how they fly. And that's just so important to me as we go. And it just makes the journey even more of a privilege and an honor to be able to, not only try to decarbonize the airline industry, but make sure that communities have access to it. So anyways, big task, pretty excited about that. On the personal side, I will say, and I'm just one of the most honest people in the world. So I've had an existential crisis for the last 3 weeks because I had felt like I'm going to have to leave this company that I love so much in this industry because I'm kind of at the top, like in terms of my level of being able to do sustainability and ESG. And so at some point I was like, in the next 3 years, I'm going to have to leave Delta. I'm going to have to go to another company if I want to keep doing sustainability because this is my passion. And then a mentor said to me recently, which Ruth said it at the very beginning, sustainability is now embedded in this company. DE&I is now embedded in this company. And because I've had a front row seat through my job launching it, now my task becomes to integrate it throughout the business into groups that maybe haven't connected to it or groups that don't naturally connect to it as much. And so now I've changed my existential crisis from I have to leave Delta to my challenge is not even a challenge, it's exciting. How do I take this work and my passion and kind of bring it throughout the 80,000 employees that Delta has? And we have such a diverse workforce that it's going to be a really fun challenge to figure out how do you connect everyone throughout the company to the work that we're doing in this centralized matrix. And so while I do it as my day job, no matter where my career goes, it's exciting to think it'll be part of my leadership skill set that I'm bringing going forward.
Amelia, you don't need to leave Delta because our roles will be right up there. I have seen it time and time again with a number of my clients. So there's so much work to be done. Thank you for all this insight today. It's amazing. Cody, what do we do next? We answer some of these millions of questions that came through. Do you have a summary of some of these questions so we can grab a few?
Absolutely, Ruth. We do. These students have really brought some amazing questions. Our first question comes from Jayagi Lasaid, and I apologize if I'm not saying your name correctly, but please go ahead, introduce yourself, and then ask your question.
Hello, I'm Jaji. I'm currently a student at Queens College, and I'm studying quantitative economics as my major and environmental studies as my minor. My question is, how do you suggest getting involved prior to having ESG specific role? A secondary question I have is, how do you start a sustainability ERG efficiently? I tried to start one at a previous company and it took over a year of pestering. And at that point, I had switched companies for overall more in line with my career. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I do that faster?
I'm actually going to start with your last question only, and I'm laughing only because we had a team event last night and 2 people on my team are the 2 people that started Delta's sustainability, our business resource group. It's called Green Up. And I asked them, I said, how did you get started with this? Because they said it was a crazy concept, right? Our business resource groups today are predominantly kind of focused on just representation, right? Bold for our Black group, and Latino group and et cetera, et cetera. So what they did was they got in front of the group that was doing it. And what a guy on my team had done literally was he had saved all the mail that Delta had sent him for 2 years and took it into that leadership group and dumped it on a table and said, this is why we have a problem, because no one's thinking about this stuff at the company. We've got a sustainability team that's worried about compliance and it's worried about fuel, and no one's thinking about all the other ways that we're harming the environment at this point. And it was at that moment they were like, you're totally right. And we're not going to staff a team to do this. So it's a really hard thing to do. One thing I would just offer is if you would like to connect with me on LinkedIn, we would be very happy to tell you our journey here at Delta, because it actually then became our fastest growing business resource group. It is our biggest business resource group right now. And so they are alive and well. And I appreciate you taking the effort there. I don't know, Julia, if you want to take the other one on.
Sure. Yeah, and I can add to that question too. We have a sustainability ERG, and I have to say, we're not doing a good enough job, I think, engaging that group yet. My team is, and so I'm just going to give you the other side of this. My team is very early in our journey, right? So we've been focusing on sustainability for a little over a year. We have a very small team in this huge remit, and everyone's just working a crazy amount and trying to figure out how to do all of the things. And so we'll constantly think we need to think about how do we engage the ERG more? Let's think about how to engage them. But it's just hard, when there's so much work and such a small team to engage them. And so what I think that they could do to make it easier for us to engage them is if we could we could do a better job of letting them know, here's our strategy and here are the things that we're trying to accomplish and that we're focused on. And we can get them to a place where they fully understand it. And then we can help them to say, we can tee them up to say, what might you do in your area that plugs into that? Then it will work. That's what we want to do this year. And that's what we want to focus on. But I think that what can be challenging is if that group wants to go off and like do some very grand thing that we don't have the capacity to support yet, then it's tricky, right? And so I think that to the extent that if you're bringing people together to focus on this, if you can really work hand in hand with the team that's responsible for this effort and really understand from them, like based on our company-wide priorities, what are some activities that our team can do that can fulfill those objectives? Like, for example, one thing that might be good is like, if folks work in one of our warehouses, come together to identify opportunities to decrease waste in a warehouse. You know, they're on the ground, they see it like that, and we're trying to minimize our impacts anyway. So that would really fit, right? Versus like signing up for a new way to conceptualize sustainability at the company, like that would not fit, you know? So I think it's a matter of just understanding like where could you plug in a way that, that will sync. Okay, so that's the first question, and the second question. And the first question is just how do you prepare yourself for a job in ESG? I think the good news is that it's an exploding industry, and so there are going to be more and more and more jobs. And so I think I don't know, I would follow where my interest is, because there are so many ways into ESG. There's more around communication with people about, communication with employees and customers is very different from communication with investors. That's its own thing. There's like the finance team has an important role to play. So that can be a way in. The supply chain team on our end has a very important role to play. And so someone who's interested in logistics can kind of focus on logistics with a sustainability bent, Product design, super important. You can be an engineer who's interested in sustainability and kind of comes. So I think still, just like with everything else, follow your own internal interests, right? Follow your orientation. What are the things that get you super excited? If you're interested in ESG, think about where's the intersection of ESG and that interest base. And then if you're applying for a role that has that component part to it, great. And if your existing role doesn't have that component part and it's appropriate with, your manager or whatever, think about how do you plug in with the sustainability efforts or the social impact efforts that are already happening at your company, because so much of this, as we've been talking about, is really cross-functional. And so it's like, let's all hold hands and do this together, just in an integrated way. And so if you're approaching this collaboration in a way that's synced up with the company's priorities, it's going to be very welcome, I think.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the answers. I'm writing this down as you speak. So thank you so much.
Excellent question and great answers. We have so many more to get through in the last couple of minutes. Let's try to sneak in 2 more questions. I'd like to bring up Ricardo Brown, who has a question about getting buy-in on ESG. Ricardo, go ahead, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, so my name is Ricardo Bowen. I'm American, but I studied my master's in political science at the University of Copenhagen. So for my question, I want to ask you, how are you able to persuade others in your company that ESG is important and interrelated with all the work that you do and interrelated with all the work that's in other departments, as well as what is something in your career that you've never expected to do?
I can start and then pass it to Amelia. This is truly what I spend most of my time doing. I get to really think about who are all the stakeholders I need to influence and what do they care about and how do I talk about our ESG work in a way that's going to really resonate for them. And the good news is that there's a way in to ESG for so many, and it's just different depending on the stakeholder. So when I talk to our head of investor relations and our finance team, what I and the team really lean into is the fact that this is an area that investors care about tremendously, and they're making that very clear in a variety of ways. We get ratings and scores, and that's all published publicly. And so you can see that they care about this. Let's look at our top investors. What have they said publicly that they care about? See, this is important to them. If I'm speaking to brand and comms, there's so much information out there about how customers care deeply about affiliating themselves with brands that are showing up in the right way on ESG topics. If I'm talking to our people team, again, tons of information out there, including our own internal surveys that show that prospective employees are making decisions about where to work, where to stay, based on whether they can feel proud of the work that that company is doing. In terms of the supply chain team, when I talk to them, I really lean into the fact that so often sustainability initiatives are involve becoming more efficient and therefore saving money, and our incentives are aligned. So when we pursue initiatives that are going to be more efficient, it's going to be good for the supply chain team. It's going to save money. It's going to keep that team happier that they're being more efficient, and it's going to support our sustainability efforts. And with the product team, I talk about the fact that, in a world where we're trying to differentiate ourselves and show up in a really inventive way and cutting edge, leading on sustainability is one way that companies are distinguishing themselves in terms of being cutting edge. So there's a true story to tell all of the different stakeholders at the table. And it's really just a matter of threading that needle and communicating that precisely to folks. I'll turn it over to Amelia to answer that question in your second.
Perfect. Julian, I think nailed most of it. I approach from two ways for ESG. So I do a weekly call with basically, and this is more sustainability, right? Just because again, the environmental part is just such a big thing for us. So it's just environmental sustainability. And I've always said there's zero hierarchy. Anyone can come from any of the teams that are participating in their day job. So it's not our business resource group. It's the legal and finance to our sales team, to our onboard services team. Everyone comes up and don't care about title. And it's completely informal. And we often have brainstorming where I'll show up and be like, okay, here's the problem I got today. And what do you guys think? And so we really treat everyone as part of the team. And I think people are so engaged in it because that's not always how corporate America works, where you get a chance to be at a lower level, at an analyst level, kind of driving this overarching strategy. It's often pushed down. And with sustainability, we're really trying to push it up because, we say the next generation is going to really fix all of our problems, but I don't think we often actually give them the empowerment to do that. And so we're really trying to empower at the lower levels to drive the strategy. And then to Julia's point, then we figure out how to translate that into the higher level executives through our ESG council, where you often have to tell another story, which is often investors need it, or it's being mandated, or we're anticipating issues, or our competitors are doing this, or our consumers, right? There's different angles depending upon what you're trying to do. And so I personally fundamentally believe in that balance. I think the other thing which we talked about when we talked about hiring, Julia mentioned this, we are out and about day in and day out at this company, telling our story, introducing ourselves, trying to make compelling reasons. So if I go talk to, one team that maybe one sort of kind of makeup and knowledge of this topic and one sort of connection to it, I tailor a message that maybe is saying, hey, this is altruistic and we need to do this and blah, 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 blah. And then I'll go talk to another group over here and I'll give them a different message for why we need to do it. But the point is we're bringing along the teams. It's very grassroots.
Yeah, Amelia, same thing. KPMG here in the U.S. is 35,000 employees, and years ago when I saw this ESG and I kind of realized what the opportunities here for our firm, I went straight to the top. And being a younger professional, a younger partner here, these senior partners don't always pay attention to younger partners, right? But I said, just hold on tight and listen to what I have to tell you. And this is years pre-pandemic, and I think at that time they were like, wait, what? The conversation today is far easier. There isn't a headline that you can get through in a day without ESG or sustainability or something that's coming up. So, but being that person, that first person to raise their hand and say, we need to pull it all together, guys. We're doing spots of sustainability everywhere within our services. We need to pull it together and call ourselves one thing and go to market one way. From a hiring perspective, we don't have a whole lot of issues hiring into ESG because this is work that our next generation wants to do. There are so many people that want to do this work and want to be educated in it. Now, the only challenge there is really looking at to see whether or not the chemistry works, that person's work ethic is there, because the rest we can coach, right? Some of you are coming in without that sustainability minor or econ major. It's okay, because like I mentioned earlier, ESG and sustainability is going to be weaved into the business. So long as you continually are hungry to learn and upskill yourself, whether it's understanding what the mandates are across the world with respect to ESG reporting, right? companies today are jumping up and down. Like maybe 2 years ago, they're like, okay, Ruth, I hear you, but we have bigger fish to fry, bigger problems to solve at my company. Today, this is one of those big problems because regulation now has come down, and the world's regulators, the world's governments are asking companies to report on their sustainability, and it really has lit a fire under these companies and progressed these projects and brought them to the forefront. So this has been amazing. Cody, do we have any more time here?
We are going to try to squeeze in one more question because I think you answered our question from Kyle just with that last answer. So I'd like to invite Claire Quinn to ask her question about graduation requirements. Do we do grad school? Do we not do grad school? Claire, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Claire Quinn. I'm a recent graduate from Pace University with a bachelor's in economics. I'm currently working at an environmental nonprofit, just trying to figure out what my next steps should be. So is there a level of education that you guys recommend or are seeking out when you're hiring?
I'll go very just broad on this, which is to say, if you're going to do a master's degree at all, make sure you're doing it because you want to do it and that there's something you want to get out of it. Otherwise, just don't do it. It's just my advice I always give. I did an MBA purely because I was a math major and didn't have a business background. And I did my MBA overseas. As one of the earlier people mentioned, it was in Copenhagen. I did mine in Amsterdam. I partially did it just because I was like, how cool would it be to do a master's program overseas? That sounds amazing, right? Personal fulfillment is why you do a master's. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of money and you're probably not going to get And I will say it took a while for that MBA to pay off. That's the other thing. Like I did not get promoted right away. I did not get the payback on that right away. Like it took a while. And if had I not done that for my own personal reasons, I would have been frustrated. So we are not there. We have no requirements to how we hire based upon education. I have no education in this space. And as I just mentioned, I learned it all from podcasts.
Yeah, I strongly co-sign what Amelia just said. And by the way, Claire, I also graduated from Pace when I was a teacher. I got my master's in teaching from Pace. So hello to a fellow alum. I couldn't agree more. I think that at the end of the day, we need to be pursuing opportunities because they're the right opportunities for us, not because it looks good to somebody else. Because you might get in front of the right person, you might not. Like you have to be going down the path that is exciting to you, that fulfills some kind of passion inside you. And you need to be putting yourself out there and meeting people, going to, if your school has any kind of, or whatever, like whatever affiliation you have, has any kind of programming where you can meet, like what you're doing right now, meet people who are in the field, learn from them, chat with them, talk to someone one-on-one, they'll connect you to someone else. That's the most fruitful path, I find. And if you're trying to get some kind of education, just make sure you're understanding what specific gap that's filling for you. And if it's filling a gap for you that you need, absolutely go for it. It's fantastic. I have my MBA and that has opened so many doors for me, but I would never recommend getting your MBA because it's a stamp. I would recommend getting your education because that's knowledge that you're hungry for. That's a network that you're hungry for. You see how that's on the critical path to your next step.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Fantastic. And yes, I would be remiss if we did not create some space for Ruth to share. She just typed some of her thoughts in the chat as well. With 1 minute left, I just want to say thank you so much to all three of you, Amelia, Julia, and Ruth, for this amazing session. Great advice. This is just the start, clearly. This is a marathon. We're in this for the long haul. And I think you've all done a beautiful job painting that picture for us. To our students and attendees, thank you for being here. I hope that you enjoyed this time and that you now feel so much more equipped to go out and start those careers in ESG and sustainability, start all of the business resource groups and ERGs at your institutions as well. And if you're still a student looking for opportunities to build your skills and careers, to take your career to the next step, right? Remember that at Paragon One, we're here to help you, and we do more than offer these amazing sessions. We have incredible remote externships that we have co-created with amazing companies like HSBC, PwC, Beats by Dre, Meta, Pfizer. The list really does go on and on. So please make sure you look at the Zoom chat before you sign off, because we also have an opportunity for you to earn a little gift card for participating in a Post Bridges event TikTok engagement challenge. So yes, exactly, Julia. That's how we feel about it too. We love TikTok here at Paragon One, and we know that there are some people here in this room who do too. One last huge thank you to everyone for making this an amazing session. Have a really great Thursday and enjoy. Be well, everyone.